Today I am reading from the eighth book in the Left Behind series. The name of the book is called The Mark, The Beast Rules the World, and today I'm reading chapter 16. Buck and Albie joined and separated from and joined again a caravan of GC vehicles picking its way through what was left of Thomas. Would you look at that, Albie said, nodding toward open trucks carrying guillotines. They're ugly, but there's really not much to 'em, is there? Buck shook his head. That's one of my sidebar stories. How easily they can be assembled. They're simple machines with basic pattern cut parts. Each is basically wood, screws, blade, spring, and rope. That's why it was so easy for the GC to send out the specs and let anybody who wanted work and had the materials to have at it. You've got huge manufacturing plants reopening to mass produce these, competing with amateur craftsmen in their backyards. All for something the GC says will serve as a, what did they call it officially? Visual deterrent. They put just one at each mark application site, and everyone is supposed to fall in line. Albie stopped where a GC peacekeeper was directing traffic. He signaled the young woman over. I'm working here, she said testily until she recognized the uniform. She saluted. At your service, Commander. We've been assigned the main detention facility, but I left the manifest in my bag. Are we close? The main facility, sir? I think that's what it said. Well, they're all together about 3 clicks west. Take a left at your next intersection and follow the unpaved road around a curve until it joins the rebuilt highway again. The center will be on your right, just inside the city. Can't miss it. Massive, surrounded by barbed wire and more of us. Better hurry, though, if you want to see the fun. They're going to do some chopping tonight if the rebels don't soil themselves and change their minds. Yeah. Word I get is they're lining them up and sorting them out now. The ones who go back to their cells with their heads attached will have a new tattoo tomorrow. David was exhausted. It was nearly 2,300 hours, Carpathia time, and as he trudged from his office towards his quarters, he was stunned to hear energetic steps behind him and turned to see Viv Ivins, looking as fresh and gung-ho as she did every morning. She carried a leather portfolio and smiled brightly at David. Evening, Dr. Hasid, she called out as she drew alongside. Ma'am, great days, huh? He didn't know how long he could maintain the charade. Interesting days anyway, he said. She stopped. I love when things fall into place. He thought that an unfortunate choice of words, given his personal coordination of guillotine production and distribution. Things humming along, are they? He said. I've persuaded top brass not to display loyalty enforcement facilitators here at the palace. Oh, not the best image. They're showing up all over the world. And that's fine. I can live with that. In fact, I'm all for it. Outside the capital city and the headquarters in particular, you will have certain elements who need the visual aid, a reminder of the seriousness of this test of loyalty. One would have to be pathologically committed to one's cause to really decide against the mark. Seeing the consequence standing right before you as you make your decision will persuade those who merely want a little attention for stalling with their choice. But not here. Not necessary. If a person was not loyal to the risen potentate, why would he or she want to work here? What I want to see produced here are pictures, still and moving, of happy, willing, joyful loyalists. The citizenry of the global community should see rapture on the faces of those it depends upon to administer the New World Order. No enforcement is needed here. We are the examples to the world of the joy of commitment, the sense of fulfillment when one takes his stand. Follow? Sure, and I have to say, I like the idea of those ugly contraptions not dotting the landscape here. I couldn't agree more. We start with new hires tomorrow, and there was much enthusiasm among them over being among the first to receive the potentate's mark. All are opting for his image on their foreheads. I plan to go for the simple understatement, but I have to say, Mr. Hassid, it's fun to see these kids today with their eagerness to stand out. You're interviewing a prospect tomorrow? Right. The Asian prodigy? That's him. What a family. His father is pleading to have his son be the first to receive the mark. It's too late for that, as we're beginning with political prisoners. But he very well could be the first GC employee. David blanched and tried to cover, but he's not been hired yet. It's a foregone conclusion, though, right? Well, I need to talk with him at length. Determine his suitability to take his last year of high school here. Be away from his parents for the first time, see where he fits best. But the odds of him not being hired somewhere here are minuscule. Minuscule. He could process we could process him first, and he would in essence be pre-approved to work in any department, sort of like a pre-approved mortgage. First you qualify, then you make an offer on anything in your price range. I wouldn't do that, David blurted. Why not? It just doesn't seem as buttoned down as we like to be. Let's let the process run its course. Do it right. Oh, Mr. Hassid, honestly, what would be the harm? He shrugged. I was told the boy is scared to death of the needles and is fighting the whole idea. Even to the point where he would pass up a golden opportunity here. He's going to have to take the mark in the United Asian States anyway, or he'll lose more than a job. Maybe he'll get used to the idea by then. Oh, pish posh, Director Hassid. If he's so brilliant, it's time for him to grow up. He may fight it, but it'll be over in seconds, and he'll see he made a big to-do about nothing. Well, my meeting with him is at 0900 hours. It can wait until after that, can't it? I'd hate to try to interview him after he's been through a trauma. A trauma, I just told you, but he'll still be upset. I can't imagine them administering marks before 0900 anyway. In his room, a few minutes later, David used his sub notebook to double check his secretary's schedule. She had not informed him of a time for his appointment with Chang, and a quick look at his calendar showed why. The meeting had been confirmed at the end of the day for 1400 hours. 2 o'clock. It was something she would tell him in the morning. David changed it on her calendar to 0900, then hacked into personnel's computer and did the same. He phoned 4054 and left a voice message. Chang, our interview tomorrow has been changed to 9 a.m. Please do not go to personnel or anywhere else until we meet. See you then. While he was finishing his message, his phone told him he had a call waiting. He punched in to find Ming. Distraught. It started here, she said. Has it started there? Slow down, Ming. What's started? Application of the mark. The equipment arrived at Buffer this morning and they're already using it tonight. Prisoners are getting the chip? Yes. I can't imagine it will be much longer for us staff. I need to bolt soon, but I wanted to check. Any believers there? Anyone refusing the mark? Not a one. They're lining up for this thing as if they've been loyal scouts forever. I think they're hoping they'll get good behavior points. Truth is, they'll still be rotting here, but with a mark on head or hand. David told her of his conversation with Viv and what he had done about it. Oh, no, she said. At 9, you must take Chang, disappear. Get him out of there. We're not prepared to leave yet, Ming. What are you going to do? I'll have to make up something, I guess. Some reason why he is not ready yet. Maybe I'll say I found evidence of immaturity and I just think he's too young to fit in. You're a director, David. Make it convincing. This has to work. I have all night to think about it, and I have all night to pray about it. I'll take all I can get, Ming. Listen, let me do something for you. I can get you reassigned to USNA. You could? Of course, I just do it through the computer and no one questions it. They see it's approved by someone higher than their level and they just don't rock the boat. Where do you want to go? There are prisons all over the state, she said, but I'm never actually going to get to one, right? Right. We get you a sign, get you on a plane, but then lose you somehow. You run off and we can't find you. But then you're on your own. You need to get to the safe house in Chicago. Would they have me? Ming. Leah has told everyone about you. They can't wait to welcome you. They knew you and your brother would eventually have to wind up there. We can use you both. Now, where shall I assign you in the States? Somewhere close enough to Chicago so you can get to the safe house, but not so suspiciously close that people start putting two and two together. I don't know the States, she said. There is a huge facility in Baltimore that always needs personnel. That's a long way from Chicago. Wait, can you get to Greece? When? As soon as possible, even tonight. I guess. That's up to you. Make my transfer highest priority. And if you want GC here to get me to Greece, they'll have to do it. But David, Greece is a hot spot right now, crawling with GC and making an example of political prisoners. I don't want to work on or hide there. David told her how she would get to the States from Greece, and it would appear GC was escorting her. There is a God, she said. Where do I meet these men? Get to the airport at Kozani. They'll find you. Can you get Chang there too? Please, David, do it. Get him out of my parents' quarters, get him assigned somewhere, and have one of your pilots get him to Greece. We can go to the safe house together. Ming, please, it has to make sense. I pull a stunt like that, your parents lose track of Chang, and it all comes back to me, not to mention you. You both are sent somewhere and then wind up lost. Think, Ming. I know you're desperate and that you care. Let me work on the logistics. The last thing I want is for the GC spotlight to turn on us. I know, David, I understand. I'm thinking with my heart. Nothing wrong with that, he said, until we quit thinking at all and make things worse. We in trouble? A Greece-based GC peacekeeping chief at the detention center asked Buck when he saw he was accompanied by a deputy commander. We do everything by the book. This looks like a madhouse, frankly, Buck said, surveying the complex of 5 rather plain industrial buildings that had probably once been factories. The windows were covered with bars, and the perimeter was a tangle of fence and razor wire. But the place was crowded with GC in lines, peering at printouts in the night, using flashlights to see where various prisoners were located. We do all we can with what we have to work with, the chief said, nervously eyeing Albie. Buck continued to do the talking. How many prisoners at this facility? About 900. You've got that many GC here? Well, not quite, sir. What are they all doing? Are they assigned? Most are running the Marx Center in the middle building. What is in the other buildings? Teenagers through early 20s in the first building, males in the west wing, females in the east. Individual cells? Hardly. Prisoners are incarcerated in large common areas that used to be production lines. And in the other buildings? Women in the next, none in the center, men in the last two. What are the majority of these people charged with? Mostly felonies, some petty theft, larceny. Any violent criminals? The chief nodded back over his shoulder. Murderers, armed robbers, and the like, right here? Political prisoners? Mostly in the second building. But religious dissidents, at least the men, are right here too. He motioned to the last building again. You've got descendants in with violent criminals? Buck said, leaning forward as if to get a better look at the man's nameplate. Where they've placed is not my call, sir. I'm coordinating the loyalty mark application, and I need to be in that center building in about 5 minutes. You want to help? I got a crew of 6 moving from building to building, starting with the west, doing preliminary sorting. Meaning, determining whether any plan to refuse the mark, and if so, they are to identify themselves immediately. We're not going to waste time letting people wait until they're in line to decide whether they want to live or die. What if some change their minds in line? Decide it's the last minute they don't want the mark after all. I don't foresee that. But what if they do? We deal with that quickly. But for the most part, we want to know in advance so we don't hold things up. Now, gentlemen, I have orders. Will you help with the culling or not? Will this be going on simultaneously in all the buildings? Buck asked, not wanting to miss the pastor or Mrs. Miklos. No, we're starting at the West Building. Prisoners will be escorted to the center building for processing, then back before those in the next building go, and so forth. We'll help, Buck said. The chief shouted, Athenas, and a stocky middle-aged peacekeeper with a 1-inch black crew cut stepped up, 3 men and 2 women in uniform behind him. Ready, Alex? Ready, sir, Alex said, with a high-pitched voice that didn't match his physique. Take Jensen and Elbaz here with you. I have sufficient staff, sir. The chief lowered his head and stared at Athenas. They're here from USNA, and if you didn't notice, AA, Mr. Elbaz is a deputy commander. Yes, sir. Would Mr. Elbaz care to lead? Albie stuck out his lower lip and shook his head. It was 2 a.m, 2 in the afternoon in Chicago, and the remaining Tribulation Force members crowded around the television. The local GC News reported that mark applications had begun at local jails and prisons. Zeke sat rocking before the TV, his hands over his mouth. Rayford asked if James Jerusalem disguise was ready. Zeke kept his eyes on the screen and took his hands from his mouth only long enough to say, all but the robe, done by tonight. Tyson had come up with the idea of letting Zeke change James' appearance exactly as he had been planning, but also outfitting him in sandals and a thick brown hooded robe that extended far enough in front of his face to hide his features. The whole garment would go over his head and the hem would settle an inch off the ground. The waist clinched with a braided rope. Everyone agreed it sounded humble and nondescript, and yet ominous enough once Chaim was seen by crowds as in charge and with something to say. Chaim was slowly accepting the idea, provided he could play act from the shadows of his garb. I still say Tyson ought to go. Let me promise you, my friend, Tyson said, allow God to use you mightily to get his people to safety, and I will come and address them in person sometime. The TV anchorman announced that while the area GC had not expected to need the loyalty enforcement facilitators, one prisoner had reportedly refused to take the mark and had been executed. This occurred at what was formerly known as the DuPage County Jail. An execution of the descendant was carried out less than 90 minutes ago. The rebel, serving an intermediate sentence for black market trafficking of fuel oil, has been identified as 54-year-old Gustav Zuckermando, formerly of Des Plaines. Zeke buried his face in his hands and toppled onto his side, where he lay crying quietly. One by one, the rest of the force approached to merely lay a hand on him and cry with him. Tyson, Chaim, Rayford, Leah, and Chloe surrounded him, and Tyson prayed. Our Father, once again we face the wrenching loss of a loved one. Shower our young brother with hope eternal and remind us all that we will one day see again this brave martyr. When Tyson finished, Zeke drew a sleeve across his wet face, moved to his hands and knees, and then awkwardly rose. You all right, son? Rayford asked. Got work to do is all, Zeke said, averting his eyes, and he shuffled back toward his room. Buck had a bad taste in his mouth. He had been in these situations before, had seen enough depravity and mayhem to last several lifetimes, but he wished he and Albie had brought high-powered automatic weapons so they could at least attempt to rescue. How, in his flesh, he wanted to spray deadly projectiles into the swarming GC. How he could love to have stormed the detention barracks looking for people with the mark of Christ and ferrying them to safety. But here was an impossible situation. Prophecy was once again coming to life before his eyes, and he would not be able to turn away. At the West Building, the 8 members of the calling team were checked in past the outer fence and then again at the main entrance. Buck was assaulted by the stench as soon as they had cleared the main corridor. Inside a huge cage milled more than 100 male teenagers, some looking tough, others petrified. The cage was surrounded with 4 to 5 guards on a side, weapons in hand, smoking, reading magazines, and looking bored. The teenagers jumped and cheered and applauded when the team entered. Freedom, one shouted while the rest laughed. They've come to free us, and others jeered and mocked. Athena stepped away from the others and put up both hands for quiet. Buck sidled to a guard who dropped his magazine and straightened up. Sir, he said, what's the smell, soldier? The cans, sir, in the corners, see? Buck looked to the 4 corners of the cage where 55-gallon drums stood. Each had a makeshift wooden set of steps next to it and was covered in an ill-fitting toilet seat. This building has no facilities. Only for us, the guard said, just down the hall. Buck shook his head. They can't be led there periodically. Not enough of us to risk that. Alex Athenas had finally commanded the prisoner's attention. You're privileged to be among the first to display your loyalty and devotion to His Excellency, the risen potentate of the global community, Nikolai Carpathia. To Buck's amazement, this was met with enthusiastic cheering and applause that went on for almost a minute. Some teens broke into chants and songs lauding Carpathia. Athenas finally quieted them again. In a few moments, you will be led to the central building, where you will tell the staff whether you want your loyalty mark on your forehead or your right hand. The area you choose will then be disinfected with an alcohol solution. When it is your turn, you will enter a cubicle where you will sit and be injected with a biochip, while simultaneously tattooed with the prefix 216, which identifies you as a citizen of the United Carpathian States. The application takes just seconds. The disinfectant also contains a local anesthetic, and you should have experienced no discomfort. Any acts of disorderly contact will be met with immediate justice. For you illiterates, that means you will be dead before you hit the floor. This was met with more hooting and hollering, but Buck found himself staring at a boy in the middle of the crowd. He had black curly hair with thin and pasty, and wore tilting glasses that appeared to have one lens missing. The boy looked barely old enough to be in this crowd, but what caught Buck's eye was a shadow on his forehead. Or was it a smudge? Or was it the seal of God? Excuse me, officer, Buck said, striding past Athenas and peering into the cage. The hooting stopped and the prisoners stared. You there. Yes, you. Step forward. The young man made his way through the crowd to the front of the cage where he stood quaking. Someone opened this door, Buck barked. No one moved. He whirled to look at the guard he had spoken to, who shuffled nervously and looked at Athenas. The rest of you back off, Athenas said, and he nodded to the guard who unlocked the cage. Buck marched in and grabbed the boy by the arm, his ratty gray sweater bunching under Buck's fingers. He dragged him out of the cage, past Athenas and the other guards, scolding him the whole way. You mock global community peacekeepers, young man, you'll learn respect. No, sir, please. I. Shut up and keep moving. Buck dragged him past the guards at the entrance, who called after him, Wait, who is that? We have to process him out. Later, Buck said, Where are we going? The boy pleaded with a Greek accent. Home, Buck whispered. But my parents are here. Give me their names, Buck said, and he wrote them down. I can't guarantee they'll get out, but you're not going to die tonight. You're a believer? Buck nodded and shushed him. They blew past the guards at the outer gate, and Buck marched him to the GC Jeep across the road, past the lights and into the shadows. Few heads had even turned to watch. Front passenger side, Buck said. Any other believers in the cage? The boy shook his head. Never saw anyone. Give me the name of one of the guys in the cage, just one. Who? Anyone, just give me a name. Ah, Paulo Ganter. Got it. Now listen. You are to sit here, right here in this Jeep, until I get back. What you must not do, are you listening, is make sure that no one is watching. Because if you discover that, you might be tempted to make a run for it and not stop until you are somewhere safe. Then I would get back out here later and wonder Whatever happened to my prisoner? Understand? I think so. You don't want me to do this? Of course not. I don't know what I'd do about an escapee. Do you? The boy managed a weak smile. You know what? Buck said. I don't think anybody's watching now. Feeling like Inez, the mysterious border guard who had discovered Tyson under the seat of the bus so long ago, Buck put one hand on the boy's shoulder and another on the head, and he said, "And now may the Lord bless you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Godspeed, son." Buck trotted back to the gate, and when he glanced over his shoulder, the boy was gone. The gate guards let Buck through, and the ones at the building asked, "Who was that?" Ganter Polio, he said, transferred custody to the United North American States. They were flipping through their printouts as he hurried back in. Alex Athenas was finishing. Are there any here who would be choosing to reject the loyalty mark? The group laughed and waved at him. None, then. No one. Anyone. The prisoners looked at each other and quieted. Buck waited and watched to see if the boy had been wrong and there had been any other believers who might take a stand. What if we say no? A tough called out, smirking. You know the consequences, Alex said. The boy drew a finger across his neck. That's right, Alex added. Any questions? No rebels here, someone shouted. All loyal, upstanding citizens. That's what we'd like to hear. No questions? Do we get to choose what image we want? No, because of your circumstances, you are allowed only the basic chip and number tattoo. The prisoners groused loudly, and Athena signaled to his team and the other armed guards to get into position. This will be done in an orderly fashion, he said, or you will wish you had opted to reject the mark. And that's the end of chapter 16. Next, I'll be reading chapter 17. Thank you for joining me, and have a wonderful day.